The following opinions are solely those of BoatTEST.com and its test captain. Hi, Captain Steve for BoatTEST.com, and today we're going to take a new Monte Carlo 65 motor yacht from Fort Lauderdale out into the Atlantic to do a full performance test. This 64-foot 5-inch yacht has a beam of 17 feet, draws 5 feet 10 inches, and has a tested displacement of about 81,000 pounds. She's powered by twin MAN 1200 diesels, delivering a total of 2,400 horsepower through conventional inboard straight shaft drives. It takes about 12.5 seconds to get on plane because the turbos need to kick in first, but in another 2 seconds, she was going 26 knots. At 2350 RPM, I measured a top speed of 29.7 knots, with the engines burning 120 gallons per hour. Best cruise speed depends on whether the captain wants speed or range. At 1750 RPM, she'll go 20.1 knots, burning 60 gallons per hour for a range of 279 nautical miles. At 2000 RPM, I recorded 24 knots, burning 84 gallons per hour, and at 2250 RPM, she went 27.7 knots and burned 108 gallons per hour. When maxing range is the mission, the Monte Carlo 65 can do quite handsomely. For owners making long passages offshore, 10 knots is economical and comfortable, and the range is 614 nautical miles with a 10% fuel reserve. When I put the yacht into a tight turn, she leaned in about 16 degrees and completed a turn in about 4 boat lengths. Running over our wake at 26 knots, the bow through the sea is side without a shudder and plowed through the waves without much loss of boat speed. This boat is solid, and I can tell that she'll be able to take most anything. She was responsive to my command at any speed over 3 knots or so. Her significant bow flare and high freeboard forward kept spray down as I plowed through waves. Seated at the helm on the flying bridge, I had a good view of the bow, but not too much of the stern. This is a real captain's control station, not an afterthought stuck on a large sunning deck. All of the screens, gauges, and controls on the lower helm are duplicated at the upper helm. When standing, I could easily reach the throttles. I like the hardtop because of the shade, and whether standing or sitting, I felt that I was enclosed by the bulwarks of a substantial flying bridge meant to be used in all but the worst conditions. The captain's seat is wide enough for 3 adults, and I very much like the idea of having another set or 2 of eyes keeping a lookout, particularly when going this fast. I also like the gathering area next to the helm to keep the owner/operator company. The Monte Carlo 65 I tested was equipped with a Zenta Smart Stick, which is a joystick that controls the twin props as well as the bow and stern thruster. The Zenta Smart Stick is very sensitive, but it's also dead-on accurate, and I liked it. Now, let's get into the operational areas, starting with the daily engine check. The easiest way to enter the engine room is through the large watertight hatch in the transom. You can see the fuel tanks to either side with the fuel filters within easy reach. Stainless steel rails surround both engines and lead you directly to the generator and the stern thruster batteries. Headroom is about 5 feet 10 inches. I also found it easy to get outboard of the MAN 8-cylinder engines. The thing that stands out in my mind about this engine room is that everything is well marked and easy to reach. The electrical panels are on the forward bulkhead. Dual Raycor filters are on the port and starboard fuel tanks, and both tanks have sight glass tubes so the captain does not have to rely on electronic gauges. The cable master has rollers to make it work flawlessly. The ship's combo washer dryer is at the entrance to the engine room, right next to the crew quarters. Now, let's go to the bow. As we come forward to the working end of the bow, you go from a rail that's 23 inches high to no real railing at all, so I'd like to see some sort of a support system as you make your way to the working end of the bow. To port and starboard are huge sun pads, and forward is a recessed area behind the raised bow, which makes it easier to work the anchor and lines without bending over. As we go to the working end of the bow, we step down so you're not having to stoop down to get to the working area. Supports for a bimini will go in this section here. Pop-up LED lights, heavy-duty cleats. To the side of the windlass, remote controls and a washdown. Storage is over to the left. The Monte Carlo 65 has open bow chocks with heavy rollers, and the anti-chafe strips are just outside. No worry about the lines making a right angle as they go out through the chocks because you've got cleats on the side of the bow as well. The anchor runs through the stem, and it's handled with a robust windlass with a foot control. Now let's go to the stern. The full-beam swim platform comes out 5 feet 6 inches from the transom, and the hydraulic feature is standard, so it can be lowered to add a pair of PWCs or a tender, or even create the much-enjoyed teak beach. Over to the starboard side, you can see we have a reboarding ladder. Stairs to both sides of the transom lead into the cockpit. One of them will accommodate an optional passerelle. At both quarters, there are huge chocks with 3 rollers that can handle mooring lines from 2 directions at once. There's a large warping winch on each side with a foot actuator and large bollard. Forward is a compartment for lines and fenders.
Well, that's my full test and performance review of the Monte Carlo Yacht 65. For BoatTEST.com, I'm Captain Steve. We'll see you on the water.